We got Michael Cazayoux on the podcast today. Michael just took on a new role as the president of WAG, also known as Working Against Gravity. He's also the co-founder of Brute Strength and the host of the Brute Strength podcast, which, as we talk about at some point during the show, I think at the end, has some pretty good content out there. I think there's some links, hopefully in the show notes, to the Chris Duffin episode and the Stefan Guillenet episode. I highly recommend checking those out. And Michael and I had a pretty interesting conversation here about mindset and coaching mindset and all that kind of stuff, which is a sexy topic in the fitness and business industries, but something that's prone to a lot of fluff. So Michael recently built a program for employees at WAG to actually improve their own mindset and develop themselves as individuals, which, ideally helps them function better, not just as an organization, but also helps them through their process of coaching other people in nutrition and coaching nutrition coaches. So we spent a lot of time kind of digging into not just Michael's story about his own journey in self-development and personal development, all that good stuff, but how he then has figured out how to impart those lessons to others, which, he's doing sort of on a weekly basis with his podcast, but also is doing it in a much more structured way with his actual program at WAG now. So a lot of detailed discussion on that, some tactical stuff, some strategic stuff, some big picture stuff, some, in the weed stuff. And I enjoyed having this conversation. So hopefully you enjoy listening to it. Enjoy. At Wadapalooza last weekend, I attended your talk. Was that a talk, a seminar? I don't know. Lecture?
Something like that. Either of those work.
Yeah,
there were
experience. Both of those were interviews. Experience.
Yeah, both of those were interviews. And it was actually really cool to do that on stage with my wife. Pretty exciting experience for both of us to have done that for the first time.
Yeah, it's interesting because you guys have done that on your podcast a few times, but it's more of like a discussion rather than like a specific interview like that kind of. Although you've interviewed her in more detail about some nutrition stuff as well. Right.
Yeah, I love the kind of candid, informal conversations, but I really enjoy more of a formal interview every now and then as well, because it allows us to dive really deep into a certain topic. And it's just it's a challenge for me,
Yeah, sure. And especially with, I guess that, with both of you being somewhat public facing individuals, it's probably not as strange to have those kinds of conversations in like a public area. But I do think that something that's really interesting about a more formal interview, like you mentioned, is you get to ask people questions that are a little weird to ask in normal life, right? Like you're not just going to sit down and, have an interview style discussion at home. Although you guys might, since you're into your personal development stuff, right?
I've never really thought about it that way, but for 5 to 10 years, I've had wherever I am, it kind of sounds like a podcast is going on at all times. Like I'm very, very curious about people, and I'm very particular in the way that I ask people questions. And I'm sure having done the podcast for the past 3 years has made it even more so. I'm just constantly asking people questions. So at our house, it definitely sounds like that.
That's funny. Do people ever get irritated with you? They're like, yo, man, I'm not on your podcast. Leave me alone.
I don't think so. I'm very tactful, I think, in the way that I kind of probe people. And then, if I want to ask something kind of vulnerable, then I approach it as such. I don't just dive straight in.
Yeah, I would get I feel like I have a different way of acting and speaking a little bit on podcasts, and I would be a little bit concerned about someone thinking that I was doing some weird tactical social manipulation on them.
Gotcha.
Probably.
Gotcha.
I don't know. Maybe that's a me problem.
Yeah. Yeah. I think over time, if you were to just go from not doing that at all to asking those types of questions in your relationships, it might be a little weird at first, but then if you just are consistent with that, then they're going to see you and expect something different out of you, and then it won't be weird anymore.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Although I do think that, especially for someone like me who kind of bristles at small talk, again, in a way that might be a little bit of a me problem, where it's
I don't think so. I don't know anyone that actually likes small talk.
Okay, so maybe people don't actually like small talk, but that they feel comfortable with the idea of just kind of like saying not anything of substance back and forth to sort of like build rapport.
Sure. Yeah. And a lot of people don't realize there's another option. Yeah.
I guess that's fair.
I don't think anyone's fulfilled by small talk, but I see what you're saying. Like a lot of people just don't even realize they can do something else.
Yeah. But I think that people tend to just that they feel good about just speaking to someone, that the goal is not to necessarily have a discussion or to dig into an idea. The goal is to actually just like make eye contact and move mouths back and forth, because that fulfills some sort of like social, I don't know, desire.
I actually agree with you. I've never thought about it that way. And maybe I'm kind of projecting some of my own values onto like of like what a conversation should be like. And I did this, I've done this with my dad for a while, where for the past 2 or 3 years, I've had this recurring thought, like, I don't feel like my relationship is as deep with my dad as I want it to be. And I've projected that onto him and felt and kind of told myself a story like, you know, my dad must be sad or disappointed that we're not closer. And then someone was like, basically like you're such a growth-minded person that's always like trying to take your relationships to a deeper level. Is it possible that to your dad, this is the deepest relationship in his life and it's already completely fulfilling? And when he said that, I was like, honestly, it's like a 99% chance that that's the truth. I've just never even considered that. So I think that's like kind of a tangent onto the whole conversation piece. But I think you might be right. A lot of people might just be completely satisfied with that way of speaking.
Yeah, I think that that concept of not projecting your own understanding of how things should be is kind of what I was getting at with the small talk stuff, right? Because again, as someone who has historically bristled at it and just not understood it, it's like, why do you care about how my weekend was? I don't care about how my weekend was. I don't even think in those terms.
Right.
Like, what's wrong with you? This is stupid. I don't want to talk about it, right? I mean, then like that's kind of an extreme reaction to something that's relatively innocuous. People are like, what's going on?
Right.
Not that I would necessarily say that, but I'd have that little bit of irritation with it. But having an understanding that other people have different conversational goals than me, I think helped me just calm down about it.
I like it.
Yeah, not getting so agitated over talking about the weather.
Right. No, that's actually really helpful. I like it.
Well, there you go. So small talk reframing.
That is not a sexy title for this podcast.
Dude, it's small talk is a known clickbait tactic. You talk about small talk and you just drive all kinds of engagement.
Yeah.
The Facebook algorithm is tweaked to maximize exposure to small talk. But anyway, to kind of go back to the Wadapalooza seminar, which I thought was really interesting, the one that you did with Adi on mindset, since that's actually that is kind of a sexy topic, right? Mindset, people love talking about it, and it seems to be something that a lot of people have an understanding is important, but is an area that can be confusing and difficult for people as well to figure out what actually matters. So one of the questions I had for you, because one of the main things you mentioned as being important for you in regards to mindset was learning to prioritize and to say no to stuff, right? That you mentioned that's something that's been really helpful for you recently in terms of working on your mindset. So can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah. So I was rereading this analogy this morning, actually, on exactly that. So there's this analogy that there's like imagine there's a jar and you put some big rocks in the jar. And then on top of that, you put some smaller rocks. And then on top of that, you fill it with sand. It works really well if you start with the big rocks first. But if you try to go sand in first, then small rocks, then big rocks, then a lot of times you can't fit the big rocks. So the big rocks in this analogy are the things that really, really matter to us in life. And what But what we often do is we allow the minutia in our lives to fill our jars, right? We allow email and we allow trips that don't really excite us, but we feel like obligated to be a part of and go to. We allow relationships into our lives that, or keep them in our lives that really don't excite us or bring anything valuable, and we stay in them because we feel some sense of obligation. And we allow all of this minutia, these things that don't light us up, that don't fulfill us, to keep us from putting full effort into those big rocks, those things that really, really matter to us. The past few years, I think I've been really working at stripping away the things that don't light me up. And I get it wrong all the time, but I feel like I'm getting closer and closer to identifying the things that I value most. And what's been really, really valuable this year is writing down the things that I value, writing down the people that light me up the most, that make me a better person, that I feel energized from being around. Also writing down the activities that do the same. And then in terms of like how I turn that into something practical, like that's more of a vision approach, right? Identifying the activities and the people that I want to make sure I make time for. The way that I turn that into something practical is I put things on my schedule. So if I know that I want to spend 4 times a year with my family, then I go ahead and I identify exactly when I'm going to spend time with them. If I know I want to go on 2 backpacking trips, I put that on the schedule. If I know I want to, I'm looking at my goals, or I have my goals right behind me in this office. And so I'm just like thinking of a few things. If I know I want to revisit my vision and goals once a year, I put that on the schedule. So what I'm getting at is I write down what I actually value. These are things like mental, physical health, and I order all of them: mental, physical health, intimate relationship, physical practice. I order them in terms of importance, and then I identify the people and activities that fit in those categories, and then I literally just put them on the schedule. And by doing that, I'm putting those big rocks in the jar first, so that when life happens to me, right, when I get 100 emails a day, or I get an unexpected like 3 or 4 calls in the middle of the day and it totally throws me off of my schedule, I know I'm already taking care of those big rocks. Your question was also about like learning what to say no to. For me, I am really practicing, if it's not a hell yes, then it's a hell no. I've really taken this approach when it comes to travel this year. I've had some things that, like when they're first presented to me, seem like kind of an exciting idea. I'll see if I can think of an example. Anyway, I'll have someone will offer or invite me to something that seems like an exciting idea. But then I really try to put myself, like place myself like I'm already there, and realize that by going there, I'm going to be saying no to being at home. I'm going to be saying no to routine, and really identifying, by saying yes to this thing, what am I saying no to? And if that whole picture doesn't really fire me up, and I don't feel like, yeah, I've got to do that thing, then I just don't do it. Because what I've learned for myself is that I really, really value being at home and being in routine and being in a rhythm. But travel can be sexy and elusive. And so in the past, I've just made the mistake of saying yes to all travel, because in the moment it sounds really awesome, but when I get to it, I forget, oh shit, I'm gone 3 of the 4 weeks out of this month. I should have said no to more. So if it's not a hell yes, it's a hell no.
Yeah, and based upon that heuristic, right, the hell yes or hell no heuristic,
yep.
I think that one of the things that can be tricky for people with that is that, we're essentially discussing the fact that there's an opportunity cost for your time, right? That by saying yes to something, you're saying no to something else, like you mentioned. And for some people, there is not actually a significant opportunity cost to their time, in the sense that they're not anywhere close to where they want to be and they don't have a ton of opportunity. So they need to say yes to a lot of stuff. But at some point, the curves cross, and now there is opportunity cost to you to accepting stuff, right? Yep. And for you, where you have, businesses that you're running and podcasts that gets millions of downloads and all that kind of stuff, it's obvious that, by saying yes to something, there's something else that's not happening, whether that's actual work or, just being able to exist as a person. But for other folks, that's not necessarily the case. So how do you, maybe not for yourself, but how would you recommend for someone to understand when they do need to be a little bit more deliberate with what opportunities they're choosing to accept or not accept?
Yeah, that's a really great point, because 5 years ago, I said yes to everything. And I think that was the best course of action for me at that time. I think if you're at the beginning of your career, or you're in a moment of like huge transition and the beginning of just a new endeavor, I think it can really help to say yes to as many opportunities as makes sense. Because part of the deal is that you really don't know what things you value until you go out and you experiment, right? Honestly, for me, it's just been paying attention to my emotions. As soon as I realized, hey, I'm not getting as much enjoyment out of this travel as I used to, I started to really think about it. When I realized I wasn't enjoying taking on new projects in my career, I started to get more selective in the ones that I was saying yes to. And so, we might get deeper into this, but my whole philosophy on like personal development, I think a lot of people think of it as like adding things to your life. The way I look at it is kind of just understanding what already exists. Like rather than thinking of it as like team building or building something, think about it as team deepening. I think if you can understand yourself and be aware of your own body sensations and the thoughts that you're having throughout the day, you're going to make 10 times better decisions.
So you're essentially using your just own emotional feedback as a guide to figuring out what your priorities actually are. It's like how you react to stuff, and then, okay, let's codify that into more clear priorities.
Exactly. Yeah. But just becoming aware again of thoughts and emotions. And if you're brand new to this, you're going to suck at it at first, right? You're going to think you're feeling just pissed off, but really what you're feeling is fear. And you might stumble and have to get up a million times when you're practicing this. With that said, I feel like this gives you the most amount of leverage over your own life and the most amount of power over your decisions.
So how did you become aware of those feelings for yourself? Right. It sounds like you the way you talked about it sounds like you may have some experience with sucking at being aware of your own feelings. Absolutely,
man. I remember being in rehab for the first time when I was 17, being in group therapy. And they're asking me what I felt. And with a completely straight face, I would just say, "Oh, I'm so sad right now." And they're like, "You're sad? You don't look sad. What are you feeling?" I'm so sad right now. I had absolutely no idea how to express my emotions. With that said, the way that I learned is just by talking to, like, expressing to others what I thought I was feeling. Therapists helped me a ton with this. Group therapy helped me a ton with this, right? Group therapy is just a safe place for you to express what's going on, and a safe place for your peers to give you feedback about how they perceive you. One of the most beneficial things for me was really fumbling, expressing my emotions and talking about what was going on in my head, and having people that were my age, like 16, 17-year-old kids saying, "Dude, you're full of shit." Right. And so having a safe place for this back and forth dialogue between me, therapist, and my peers taught me at a really, really rapid rate. How I work on this now is in close relationships. I just try to express what's going on with me, and then I get feedback as to if people think that fits. The other way is I write about it. And once you see your thoughts down on paper, you can start to be your own, you can start to critique your own thoughts a little bit, and you can spot your own bullshit. Right. So if I think the anger fear analogy is really poignant, because a lot of people mistake anger for mistake fear or sadness for anger, especially men, right? It's a lot more acceptable to feel angry and pissed than it is to feel afraid or sad. And so if I'm writing, I'm just so pissed at a D right now. If I really write about everything that's going on, I might identify, you know what I'm really feeling right now is I'm afraid that I'm not good enough for her. And I'm sad that, I don't know, I just feel sad. So writing about it helps a ton as well. And then finally, just noticing just noticing kind of a little bit of the definition of what an emotion is. An emotion is not something in your head. It's just a bodily sensation. So a lot of my, what I'll call negative emotions or uncomfortable emotions, they arise in my chest. Anger arises in my chest, and it's like a hot kind of flat feeling, and it rises up into my neck and my jaw. If I'm feeling anxious or stressed or afraid, really, when I'm feeling afraid, it's like this ball in the middle of my chest. And I think that's useful because once we're able to just notice those physical sensations happening in our body, we can just be present with those. And if we're present with those emotions in our body, they just dissipate really, really quickly. It's when we don't realize that they're happening in our body, and we think that we just get caught up in a story about whatever situation is making us afraid or sad, that they really can haunt us and kind of control our behavior.
Yeah, I think your point about the cultural implications surrounding emotions being confusing for people, especially men, is pretty salient, right? That there's an expectation that almost like suppressing your emotions makes you like a stronger leader, or like a better person. Sort of think of like the Jack Bauer archetype of, male hero who kind of has like a gruff voice and like doesn't really react to anything. And that a lot of people, I think, want to be like that. Mm-hmm. And think that by suppressing their emotions that they're moving in that direction. But what you're suggesting instead is not suppressing it, but just becoming aware of what it actually is and taking that for only what it is and not building that up into anything more. Is that a good way of thinking of it?
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's really helpful for men to redefine what it means to be a man in the first place, right? It never resonated with me that a man would be someone that tries to hide who he really is and how he feels so that other people think he's a certain way. A real man is just himself. And if other people like it, cool. If they don't, fuck it. Right. So if he's sad, he's sad. If he's angry, he's angry. He is just who he is all the time. I think that's the definition, or at least one of the defining characteristics of a real man.
Got it. So let's circle back to priorities, since we were, you had the analogy of filling a jar with rocks and then allowing the sand to kind of fill it, which I think is a great way of visualizing, building your calendar in your life to actually reflect your priorities. And we discussed also the idea of just being aware of your emotions to help you pick what those priorities are. And I think that something that's difficult for people when discussing things like prioritization is that they either end up way too abstract, right? So thinking only in mission, vision, and values, and having like a vision board of what they're going to do in 10 years and all that kind of stuff, but then struggling to actually implement it. And or they end up caught up in a lot of tactical stuff of like, oh, here's my productivity hack to maximize my calendar, and I use this to-do list system, and this is how my email autoresponder is set up, and all that kind of stuff. And not that there's not value in both of those in terms of having specific actionable pieces as well as big picture understanding of what's going on, but it can be difficult to kind of wed the two and figure out what you actually need to do to move your life in the direction of your priorities. So how do you think about that balance, and how do you figure out what you need to work on in order to reflect your priorities in your life?
That's a great question. I was actually thinking about this last week in terms of working against gravity, because one thing that we do really, really well is set clearly defined strategic goals for each year. Yet, one of the things that we haven't nailed out of the park yet is breaking those down into quarterly goals. And then what are the weekly and daily actions that each team member needs to be taking to reach these goals, right? We definitely have some of that, but it can be tightened up. So I'll give you an example of one thing that I've done that's been really helpful for me on the personal side. So I got really, really clear this year that I want to be doing some form of personal development coaching. And I decided that I'm going to start it with our staff of 40 people at Working Against Gravity. Now, in the past, if I would have thought about a project of this size and tried to do it all on my own and not have a deadline or anything like that, it could have taken years and it could have never gotten done. And so kind of knowing myself and knowing that pattern in myself, the way that I broke that down and made it something achievable is I said, okay, I'm going to spend an hour a day working on this course. And if I don't, and the way that I made it inevitable that I achieve that outcome is, if I don't spend an hour on any of these days, then I'm going to eat 10 double cheeseburgers and 6 shakes, right? I think I told this at Wadapalooza, something like that. That's the equivalent of 19,000 calories if I go to Hop Dottie in Austin, Texas. And you have to, to do something like that, you have to have integrity. You have to be willing to actually do the consequence, which I do. So I told my wife, I told some friends, and I don't know, I worked on it for between 50 and 100 hours. I worked on it for, like 4 or 5 months. And I've got this like first draft of a personal development course that I'm about to take our staff through. And so it was
Did you work on it for an hour today?
On an hour? No. So that stopped when I finished the course.
Oh, all right. I guess.
Great question.
You don't have to eat the burgers.
Great question. So what was I saying? So the first part is, and most people really fuck the first part up, is get crystal clear about what it looks like when you have what you say you want, right? So for me, it's not enough to just say, I want to lose weight or I want to get fitter. Because fuzzy targets rarely get hit. I didn't make that up. Someone gave me that quote. Fuzzy targets rarely get hit. If we have an ambiguous goal, we really don't know what we're shooting for. We're like shooting for a range, and a range is not exciting. It's not compelling. It's not very motivating. So if we can get first crystal clear about what success looks like for us, we're going to really set ourselves up. So instead of I want to get fitter, it might be I want to improve X, Y, and Z blood markers by 10%. I want to lose 10 pounds. I want to spend an hour in the gym 5 days a week for the next 6 months, right? All of those work. Then to break it further down, if you set a goal that it is out for a year, then break that down into maybe a quarterly goal or a monthly goal. So if it's, I want to lose 10 pounds in a year, then what do I have to do in the next month to be on track to reaching that goal? Once you get that's called a sub goal. Once you get that, then identify what's the daily or weekly habit that I need to put in place that makes it inevitable that I will reach that outcome. And so really you're just doing due diligence. You're starting with the end in mind. I think that's very helpful. Get crystal clear about what success looks like. Break it down into a or multiple sub goals, and then finally break it down into a process. What are the habits I need? What are the actions I need to take? What are the conversations that I need to have that will make it inevitable that I'm moving towards this goal? Now, we'll never be able to absolutely control an outcome, especially if it's like, if it involves other people, or if it involves, like if life could get in the way, then it might, and we can't fully control it. With that said, we can control our effort and the actions that we take. So we want to identify what those actions are that will at least move us in the direction that we're trying to go.
Yeah, so I think that last point that you brought up is something that is really interesting and difficult for the goal setting process, right? That you can set an outcome that you want, like you mentioned, lose a certain amount of weight, or improve a blood marker, or in like a competitive sports sphere, right? Qualify for some sort of event or win a game and all that kind of stuff. But those outcomes are out of your control. Mm-hmm. Like you mentioned, you can do the little pieces that potentially put you in a position to achieve that outcome, but you may not actually get it. So how do you teach people to both set a measurable outcome without becoming so emotionally attached to it that they feel that they're failing all the time if they're not actually achieving the outcome that they've specified?
That's a great question. And to be completely honest, I haven't quite figured this one out yet. I think it has something to do with... I
was hoping you had.
Yeah, man. When someone does, they're going to be a trillionaire. Anytime we expect something to happen and we put a ton of energy and focus into something, we're going to put pressure on ourselves, and we're going to get a little bit attached to that outcome. With that said, you better pick something where you enjoy parts of the journey at least, right? And a lot of people, and some of your audience might be able to really relate with this, a lot of people pick, like, I want to win the CrossFit Games, or I want to win Wadapalooza, or whatever, fill in the blank name of an event. And they spend 90% of their time really disliking their training. There's a very, very high level masters athlete that's been super successful that has talked to me over the past year about, like, it just sounds like she's miserable in the training. And the only enjoyment she has is when she gets to compete, and she's really like, she's just going for achievement, right? That's the only thing that kind of keeps her going. It sounds like a miserable way to go through life, honestly. If you don't pick an outcome that you can, I don't really like the term fall in love with the journey, because I think that gives people mixed messages. Like, there are parts of every journey that you won't enjoy. But if you don't have something where most of the journey is enjoyable to you, then pick a new goal. Like, why are you even doing it in the first place? Achieving that thing is not what's going to make you happy. It's all of these moments on the journey in the first place. Like, that's where your actual life is spent anyway. That's where 99% of your life is spent, in the journey going towards something. So if you don't enjoy that, I encourage people in a non-shaming, non-judgmental way to pick something else. And one way that I do that is to really have them look at why they're setting certain goals. Are you setting your goals because you intrinsically love them? Or are you doing it because your parents told you to, or because, so-and-so that you look up to told you to, or that, the model of who you thought you should be growing up makes it so that you should achieve that goal? And just really start a conversation about why they want to do that thing in the first place, and then create a safe place for them to change their mind. Like, we have something called the consistency bias as humans, where when we make a decision, or especially when we say it aloud and it's public, we feel embarrassed changing our minds. Right? We want to be consistent with who we say we are and what we say we're trying to accomplish. And we get embarrassed or shameful if we change our minds about something. And so we have to be aware of that and be willing to be vulnerable and change our minds.
Yeah, that example you brought up of the competitor who's miserable, I think is pretty salient to anyone who has coached high level athletes at all. Mm-hmm. Right? That a lot of them are not necessarily happy with themselves or what they're doing. And a question I have about that and maybe you have some insight here, maybe not specifically for this individual, but what I see happening for a lot of folks is that they have some sort of outcome-based goal, and then they think that by achieving that they will change how they feel.
Yep.
Right. Once I qualify for this or win that then the hole in my heart will be filled and I will no longer be a miserable person. And then, they qualify for regionals, or they qualify for the CrossFit Games, or, they win something, or they, get a certain number of Instagram followers, and then it doesn't actually change who they are, and they're still unhappy and miserable. So, that they end up in this, like you mentioned, this sort of sick position of having achieved something and then developed an identity for it, but it doesn't fulfill them in the way that they hoped it would. And now they have to just go through this process over and over again to maintain that identity.
Yep.
It's kind of twisted.
Yeah. It's called the hedonic treadmill. Have you heard that term?
Yeah.
Hedonism. It's like we work for years for this car that we covet, and then we finally get the car, and then 2 months later the car is just normal to us, and then we're on to the next car. Right? We do that with every single thing in life. We work really hard. We think, okay, I'm out of high school. I'm so pumped for college. Once I get to college, I'm going to be so happy. We get to college. We're pumped about it for a little bit, and then it's like, oh my God, I can't wait until I get out of college and get into my career. Then I'll be happy. We get into our career. Then it's to marriage. Then it's to kids. Then I don't know what's after kids. I think most people think they've got it made after that, which is obviously not the case for a lot of people. But I truly believe, and this is starting to get woo woo, but if you cannot find a way to be happy right now, then you're never going to be happy. And the way that you do that, the way that you become happy right now, is start investing in your happiness. Like, start giving yourself what you need right now. So if you're just grinding away at work, or grinding away at something, thinking that once you achieve X, Y, or Z, then you'll allow yourself to do what you really love to do, it's bullshit. You have to give yourself at least moments throughout your day and your week. You have to give yourself moments of things that you actually love to do, whether that be, exercising more. I'm sure this crowd that need to hear that, but maybe recovering a little bit more, resting more, maybe reading a little bit more, maybe spending more time with loved ones, socializing more, whatever it is for you. If you can't learn to give yourself more of what you need right now, I truly believe you'll never do that, because what happens for most people is they fixate on another achievement or another thing. And it's just this cycle that I think is, really destructive.
Yeah. So we talked a little bit about this program that you built for working against gravity. And so this is an internal program is this for the nutrition coaches to go through?
This is for all of our staff that are interested in the program.
Got it. Awesome. So this is essentially an internal program based upon a lot of these concepts surrounding mindset and self-development and all that kind of stuff. So I think something that's interesting about all these ideas is that it's one thing to sort of learn them and internalize them yourself and implement them to, varying degrees of success. But it can be very difficult to actually teach this stuff to other people and have it stick in any way. So what, if anything, have you found? Have you rolled the program out yet?
Yes.
Got it. So what have you found to work well as far as getting enough engagement and buy-in for people to make true behavior change in their own lives?
Oh, was your question, have I rolled it out yet or wrote it out yet?
Oh, no, rolled it out yet. Yeah,
rolled it out. Yeah. No, I have not. I've worked with a handful of our staff, and but that was through that process. I've revised it a bunch. Your question was what works with what?
Yeah. So just in terms of actually getting people to take action, right? Because people love mindset stuff. They're like, oh, awesome. I got inspirational quotes. We got this Carol Dweck study. This is just great stuff. And then they just turn around and are a terrible maniac who's checking Instagram constantly and gossiping and just being a general pain to be around. Right. So how do you envision not just giving people intellectual entertainment, but actually having them take action on these concepts.
Gotcha. I have a couple things. One is starting really small. Like I don't want to pretend like someone can go from a completely miserable human being that despises everything about their life to positive poly in 6 weeks, right? Changing your internal dialogue and the story you tell yourself about yourself just takes time. And all I really want people to start to do is open up a little bit and start down a new path, right? And so like all of the work that I do is accompanied by like really short, manageable exercises, a lot of writing exercises. And by doing that, I think people can, it's a lot more manageable than saying, hey, here's this entire, 12-week online course, go through it at your own pace. I think that can be a really overwhelming experience for a lot of people. I think it's really helpful to kind of hold people's hand through the experience and just have them do a couple exercises at a time. Along with that, I think in anything you want to learn or get better at, it helps to have someone hold you accountable, right? It helps to have a coach. So I'm the coach. It also helps to have, like a social environment, like your peers going through it with you. On one side, to see that you're not crazy, and on the other side, to have that extra layer of accountability. If you don't show up for the gym and you always show up to the gym, then your friends are going to start giving you shit. They're going to start texting you. They're going to say, where are you? And the same thing is going to happen with this course. They're going to go through it together. So there's the accountability from me, and then there's the accountability from their coworkers and their peers.
Right on. Sounds like a relatively robust structure there in terms of making sure people are actually doing the work and trying to create insight. So question for you, since you mentioned previously about a group therapy experience, was there for you kind of a moment where you recognize like, hey, this is really valuable stuff and I need to sort of like pivot what I'm doing and change how I think about myself? Or was it more of a gradual process that was built up through, those experiences?
Yeah, it was definitely a gradual process. But there were a couple like themes or common experiences that had a huge effect on me. One common theme was just seeing 16, 17-year-old guys just absolutely bawling about the most shameful or most hurtful moments of their lives. Just to see that level of vulnerability and courage was really, it changed me. Like I had never seen anything remotely close to that. And when I saw that, when I thought of expressing my emotions when I was still at home, like before rehab, when I thought about like, it really never even crossed my mind that I would show that I'm sad or afraid around my friends. And I thought if I did, I would be a loser. I'd be weak. But when I saw in group therapy, people doing what I thought was weak or lame, I had a totally different experience, right? I thought they were brave. I thought they were, I thought there was an element of coolness to it, honestly. Like they didn't give a shit what I thought. They were just being themselves and they were expressing themselves. And so that just really rewrote how I thought, like what I thought about like expressing yourself and being authentic in general. And the other big moment for me was I entered inpatient treatment when I was 17 and a half. And I got there and I kind of played ball for a month or so and, went through the motions. But at some point, they really pushed me. And I decided that I couldn't take it. I decided it was too hard. And the depth they were asking me to go to was too much and I wasn't going to do it. And so for the next 4 months, I completely shut down. I didn't do any therapy. I didn't do any schoolwork. And literally in class or in therapy, I would put my hands in between my heads and I would just check out. It was really a heroic effort to wall myself off and hide my emotions. And on my 18th birthday, I had every intention of leaving and getting a Greyhound bus back to Louisiana. And for whatever reason, I felt like I had to call my mom one last time and let her know that I was out. I wasn't going to be sober anymore. Fuck them. Had to call her and tell her that. She picks up the phone and she knew, like everyone knew what was going on. I had my bags packed and everything. And I called her and she's already sobbing. And she just pleaded with me not to do it. She said, I feel like my son is dying to me today. And just hearing her break down like that, maybe I was looking for, like I was crying out for help and I was looking for that. But hearing her break down like that and just seeing her in those raw emotions, I couldn't follow through with it. And so from that day on, I decided that I was just going to give everything I could to the treatment in general. And I knew that opening up in group therapy was one of the biggest ways that I was going to do that, because I was just so afraid of being myself in that group. I was so afraid of what my peers thought of me.
And how did you get past that fear? Was it based upon the fact that you had internally decided to make that commitment and were just willing to push past it? Or was it a more, again, just like gradual process of being exposed to it?
Yeah, the commitment to actually just trying was huge, because I still tried and failed lots of times. Like I would, I would just make up some bullshit that wasn't really going on to try to appear as if I were doing quote unquote work in therapy. But you have to try and fail to eventually get it right. Right. The other thing was what I spoke about in terms of the stuff that I'm doing with our staff, which is by seeing others just like you go through it themselves, it gives you permission to do it yourself, right? So to see them opening up about things that they did back home that they were ashamed of, or things that happened to them that, that kind of ruined their lives, that gave me the courage to do it myself.
Yeah, so you're picking up on the just the overall social cues of the situation of like,
yeah, okay, like this is okay here. This is expected. Yeah.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And then, so once you went through that rehab process and you'd kind of opened yourself up in that way, were you then quote unquote like into self-development, or was that something that came much later?
I wouldn't say I was into self-development per se quite yet. I was definitely into staying sober, and I was into, I was into playing the game and doing what they told me to do. So at first that was just Alcoholics Anonymous. And I did that for 5 years. I didn't have a drop of alcohol, no weed, nothing for 5 years. Went to multiple AA meetings a day sometimes. I worked with 50 plus sponsees, helping other people go through the AA program. And at some point that program didn't really work for me anymore. And that's when I realized, okay, I'm moving away from this. And I know that a lot of people that do that end up relapsing and really falling off the deep end. But I know that I've always been taught, if I practice the principles of AA, that I'll maintain a happy and fulfilling life. And so that's when I really started to focus more on the principles, right? About, just being an honest person, being a person of integrity. If I make mistakes, promptly admit it and make amends. Don't hold resentments. All of those things I started to get into, and I expanded my learning outside of Alcoholics Anonymous.
So you're able to sort of extract the principles from something that had been working for you, and then recontextualize them and reprioritize them based upon your own desires and experiences, rather than just kind of sticking with that specific framework.
Exactly.
Yeah, right on. And then I guess related to that, from an outside observer perspective, at some point, my buddy Angelo, who I think we were talking about before we were recording, and you and the Barbell Shrugged guys all seemed to get like a little bit spacey at some point. Was there a moment there that you guys kind of all, met up and decided to, excuse me, get into some weird stuff, or what's the deal with that?
Well, I don't know exactly what you mean by weird stuff, but I would say that
can mean whatever you want it to mean.
I think all of us have really been diving into learning more about ourselves, and then we've also become a little more spiritual. And honestly, I think it's just because we've all identified that that's really what makes us happier. It's what makes us have a better experience in life in general, and probably have a bigger effect on people. For a while, so I grew up Christian. And then as soon as I had the chance, I denounced that shit. That didn't make any sense for me at all. Then I went the complete opposite way and told myself I was an atheist for a number of years. And then somewhere after that, I just started to experiment with, or I just started to open myself up to really agnosticism. Like, I don't know what's going on. And over the past few years, I've been tuning in a little bit more into feeling like there may be some way that we're all connected. And I don't know, just like putting more stock in that area of my life. I think all of us have done that to a certain extent.
Got it. And that the fact that you guys are all friends and kind of going on the same journey together, probably facilitated that in terms of bouncing ideas off each other and everything like that.
Certainly.
Well.
I think that's probably why we've remained friends over the years, is because of those commonalities.
For sure. So since we've been spending a while talking about mindset and, developing processes for prioritizing and goal setting and everything like that, what are some major areas that you see as like common misconceptions or common, bad advice within mindset, particularly within fitness and business, which are two areas where I think that a lot of content is produced about how to have a stronger mind that may or may not actually be terribly helpful for people?
That's a great question. And honestly, I don't know if I'm very tuned into like what content is being produced out there. I would say that any advice on like any mindset advice that isn't accompanied with having a better understanding of yourself as you are is really one-sided. Like, a lot of people just teach mental skills such as practice mindfulness or, do progressive muscle relaxation or, a number of different things. Those are all great. But if you're not doing, this is purely my opinion, if you're not doing a little deeper work into who you are and how you became the way that you are and really what drives you and what motivates you, then all of those mental skills are only going to get you so far. And I think a lot of people, it's really easy to pick up a couple mental skills along the way, to read a book and have that in your tool set, but it takes a lot of work and a lot of courage to do the deep work. And so there aren't that many people that are experts on that. And it's also something that's really hard to talk about over a blog post or a book. But I don't know if there's any bad advice necessarily. I'm drawing a blank in terms of bad advice, because I think any form of mindset practice is good practice. Mindfulness in particular is one of my absolute favorite and most recommended things to people. But without the deep work, I don't feel like you're even scratching the surface of your mindset.
Yeah. So similar to, let's say, fitness, there's a lot of sort of surface level tactical stuff that people can do, mm-hmm. right? That may align with what they think that they want or what they need, but might not be deep enough to actually get them the results that they're looking for, right? Where it's like, oh, I want a six pack, or I want my arms to look a certain way, or, any sort of basic level goal. And if you come in hot and you're like, well, guess what? Like, you're going to have to do all this stuff with your nutrition, and here's your new workout plan, and how much are you sleeping, and all that kind of stuff. It can be overwhelming to people.
Right.
So how would you sort of bridge the gap for someone to go from, I heard that Tim Ferriss meditates, let me download a meditation app, to I need to do deep work in terms of my own personality and what I'm actually prioritizing in my life?
How would I bridge the gap?
Yeah. Like help them sort of move from the tactical surface level stuff, into that deeper stuff that might be more uncomfortable, but ultimately more productive, but not as obviously sexy, I guess, as far as like, oh, cool, I downloaded an app and I worked on my mindset for today.
I gotcha. Yeah, I haven't found any like analogy or metaphor for convincing people that it's valuable yet, that type of work is valuable yet. But for people that look up to me and, recognize, like, look at me as like a thought leader or influencer in the personal development world, or something of that sort. The way that I talk about it is like this, like the tactical things are great, but by far what has had the biggest impact on my life is first off, really, really diving into my past, into my childhood, into the moments and the experiences that really formed who I am and the beliefs that I have about how the world works and about who I am. That's been probably the most impactful. The second has been writing about and talking about my faults, like the things in life that are like shadows, the things that I'm ashamed about, the things that like my weaknesses in the ways that I communicate with people and the way that I view myself, and just getting really clear about all of the ways in which I see myself as being weak. That has been by far the most impactful for me. And I strongly believe that that's the best starting place for people. And honestly, some people aren't really open to it. And so I don't know if any metaphor or analogy or parable could convince people that are just not ready to do any kind of deep work. But, if you've been following me for any amount of time and you like what I put out, that's my strong belief. Like, dive into your past, really take a look at what your faults are. And there are lots of other ways that you can improve your mindset, but I think that will naturally and quickly improve your mindset tenfold. And so one way, and this is a huge part of the program that I'm putting our people through, is Jordan Peterson's past and present authoring program. It's a super cheap program. It can be time consuming for sure, but of all of the therapy and courses and et cetera that I've done, it's one of the most comprehensive programs I've ever looked at. And that's why I'm like, I don't want to spend the time recreating what he's done from scratch. He is by far an expert over myself. So why don't I just have people go through something really similar? So that's a great resource. That's the past and present authoring program.
Got it. Yeah, I'll find a link to that and post that in the show notes as well for people. So you mentioned finding weaknesses in yourself. When you find those, then what do you do about it?
Probably at first I hide from it. I try to deal with it, quote unquote, by myself.
Deny, blame others.
Yeah, definitely a little bit of that. At this point in my life, I'm getting so much quicker at kind of accepting it and noticing like that this is something I want to work on. But I'm still at the point where a lot of times I try to deal with it on my own. Right? I notice. I wish I could think of an example here, but I'll notice something that I do that's maybe selfish or self-serving, and rather than share it with Adi, my wife, I try to just deal with it on my own and hope it goes away. That rarely works. So then what I do is I share it with her, or I share it with one of my close friends. And from there, I'm able to stop being ashamed of it, right? Because when I share myself and I'm actually open and vulnerable, without fail, the response I get is, thank you for sharing that. I still love you. Like some version of that. And so then I can stop putting so much pressure on myself, and I can accept myself. And from a place of acceptance, then I can choose a new way of being, like a new way of acting or communicating. So it goes from identifying it, trying to do it and overcome it by myself, and then just sharing it with someone, and maybe sometimes identifying a course of action together.
Got it. So changing gears a little bit, your podcast is great and features all kinds of interesting guests and good discussions. And how does that fit in with all the stuff that we've been talking about? Is that for you just like a labor of love that you enjoy doing on the side, or is it something that you actually see as having significant tie-in to, the work you're doing with WAG, or all this discussion on like mindset and self-improvement, all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, it's a great question. The reason that we started it was because we thought it would be a great way to start to build trust with an audience that hadn't heard of us yet. And the biggest reason that we've continued to do it for, 3+ years is that it's been the number one place people have heard of us. And the reason that I love that the most is I know when people find us and sign up with us through the podcast, that means that they understand us better than anyone else, because the types of conversations I'm able to have with people on the podcast versus a video or a blog are so much deeper, right? And so they come to understand what it is that Brute really stands for, what we believe, what we really do, so much more than the rest of the public. And so it's been, first and foremost, I think it's been really great for our business, and it's allowed us it's been a big, one of the biggest ways that we've established our brand and like really what we stand for. The second is that I love having deep conversations with interesting people, and it's given me the opportunity to have conversations with people far out of my league. If I have an audience for thought leaders to speak to, there's something in it for them. There's always something in it for me, which is it helps the business and it helps me scratch my own itch of curiosity. But having the platform allows me to reach people that I probably wouldn't get to talk to otherwise.
So kind of a virtuous cycle there, in that there is some clear ROI to it in terms of people are like, awesome, this is a great podcast, I'm going to sign up for coaching. Right. But then it also helps you, sort of scratch that own itch, your own itch that you mentioned, as far as having those conversations and digging in deep with people.
Exactly.
There you go. Yeah, that's awesome. And I think we were saying this before. Was this before recording or not? But just, you get to really ask weird questions of people that might not be appropriate in normal life.
Exactly.
And especially if you get to talk to people who, like you mentioned, might be, people who you're never going to encounter in any sort of normal situation as well. That's a pretty cool thing to have.
Yeah. You don't remember our 15-minute discussion on small talk to start it off?
Well, I wasn't sure if that was before we were recording or not, but we did.
I don't know. I think you started. Yeah, I think.
Yeah, we were recording that. Yeah, you guys. It's there. First 10 minutes of the podcast. Yep. We're good. Well, right on, man. So, give people a rundown of where they can find out more about your stuff and listen to your podcast if they don't already, and check out WAG and check out Brute and whatever else they should be doing.
Yeah, guys, if you enjoyed our discussion today, you will very well likely enjoy the podcast. It's called the Brute Strength Podcast, and I interview guests in every area of health and fitness, from elite sports psychologists from the Seahawks, Red Sox, and Browns. I talk to scientists and doctors. I talk to influencers and athletes. Lots of super interesting people in the health and fitness industry. You can follow me on Instagram at Michael Cazayoux. That's Cazayoux as in X-ray. And then check us out at Working Against Gravity. We have a couple awesome new things going on. We just started coaching nutrition coaches. So if you're an aspiring nutrition coach or you already coach people and you want to learn the system that we've used with over 15,000 people, you can email us at info@workingagainstgravity.com and ask to be put on the wait list. We're going to reopen registration for both of those programs pretty soon. And you can follow us at Working Against Gravity on Instagram. That's about it.
Right on. Yeah. And as a more specific plug, some of the recent episodes that I really enjoyed with Chris Duffin. That guy's a total maniac, right? And very fascinating. I did the Kabuki Strength Seminar in Chicago last summer. It was cool. It was
nice, man. Yeah, dude. So it's so funny. We got introduced via I think I might have talked about this on the podcast. We got introduced via a book publishing friend of mine. And when I first agreed to do the show, they sent me over like a bunch of info on him. And I kind of looked it over and I was like, yeah, he seems pretty cool. Let's have him on the show. And then as I'm preparing for the show, I read the whole thing and it tells a good bit about his story. And I'm almost in tears as I'm reading just this little bio on this guy. It's one of the most insane stories I've ever heard in my life. I think he's got a book coming out in the next couple months that's going to go into way more depth into his story. But yeah, that was a great episode. Chris Duffin, 1 and 2. I think the next one will come out next week.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, I was going to say there's some cliffhangers in the first one. I was like, all right, let's get this show on the road. Let's see, what is this? The last Game of Thrones book? Like, right. Put it out, man. What are you doing? And the other one I really liked recently was the Stephen Guyenet one. Because that guy I think is one of the smartest folks out there in the nutrition space. Yes. And he's not controversial or sexy or willing to make bold claims. Yeah. So I think it can be difficult for people to necessarily resonate with what he's talking about because it's not button pushing, but I think it's some of the most helpful stuff out there as far as nutrition goes. So right. Those are my two that I recommend.
Hell yeah, man.
Thanks for listening all the way through. I admire your grit, your persistence, and your perseverance. Since you made it, I have a few favors to ask of you. Go ahead and open up the show notes on whatever podcast player you use. In there, you'll find links to all the resources that were mentioned throughout the show. There's also some links there in which you can leave a review or subscribe to the show. And podcasters are always harping on this because this actually makes a difference in terms of the algorithms that recommend podcasts to new people. So if you do that, it helps more people find the show. And if you head over to toddneef.com, you can sign up to receive most of my thoughts and writing, which really only go out to the email list. A lot of it never makes it to the blog or the podcast. So if you like what I have to say and you want to see some of my recommendations and stuff that I've been checking out, go ahead and subscribe to that email newsletter as well.